This episode was recorded at the DCF's Building Opportunity Program in October 2024.
Welcome to How to Not Kill Your Community, a podcast from the Delaware Community Foundation. In each episode, we interview experts to explore the choices we make as Delawareans, how we spend our taxes, steward our land, build housing, and how those choices impact the places we call home. What happens if we neglect our libraries, turn away newcomers, let philanthropy fade? Most importantly, how do we not kill our communities? I'm Stuart Comstock-Gay, President and CEO of the DCF. Thank you for listening. Welcome, Eric. It is an absolute treat to have you with us here today. And I am Stuart Comstock-Gay, as I think the viewers and listeners will know, at the foundation. But Eric Klinenberg is our Building Opportunity speaker this year, in the 7th year of this program, and we're so excited to have you. I'll say a few more words about you, but I'll say this in particular. I've told you how much I admire your work. I've told you how much I think the work you're doing certainly speaks to what we try to do at the Community Foundation, which is build community, build bridges, strengthen each other, make sure we're an inclusive place, look at infrastructure. And some folks will know you from your book, Palaces for the People, which is about public spaces, gathering places. Some of you may know you from your book about the heat wave in Chicago in 2000, which is such an important book, speaking about social capital, speaking about being alone and the importance of community, and really captured a lot of people's imagination about that. I actually think they should know you from your op-ed recently in the New York Times, where you talk about we ought to start naming heat waves, which I thought was a really cool thing. We don't need to go down that path, but I thought it was a really interesting little piece. But the book we're here first to talk about today is this new book that I'm holding up here, 2020, One City, 7 People in the Year That Changed Everything.
Wait, the year everything changed.
The year everything changed.
I can't tell you how much I had to think through that specific
it's an important
word
subtitle.
Choice, yeah.
Well, and the book is about, people might say, oh, the election. No. It wasn't about the election. It's about COVID and how different people responded, how people built their community, how built their connections. And I'd say it's ostensibly about COVID, but it's really about America and how we work together and live together. But having had that long introduction, why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, well, first, thank you for that nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here. It's been a terrific visit to Delaware. And I'll tell you, I wrote the book because it's been the view of mine for all of my career that crises have a way of revealing things. If you look closely at what happens during a disaster, you can see who you are, you can see what you value, you can see whose lives matter, and I guess by extension, you can see whose lives matter less. And so for all of my career, I have tried to pause at the moments when the world wants to move on and get back to normal. And I like to ask, what's really happening here? And are there things that are worth dwelling on and looking at more closely? Because if we fail to learn something about ourselves from this experience, we may be setting ourselves up for crisis the next time around as well. So it wasn't easy to do this. As you say, the 2020 refers to COVID. It actually refers to the election. It refers to the protests. It refers to the violence of that year, to the polarization, to all of that difficult stuff. And I guess there might have been better ways for me to spend 4 years of my life than staying in the year 2020, but I think it was very rewarding, and I'm happy to have done it.
One of the things I've really appreciated about this book is that the stories you tell are from very different people with very different experiences, and yet you look at each experience and you say, there's a piece of truth that this person has, even if that truth is vastly different for each of them. Can you talk about how you found people with such different lives and maybe tell some of the stories?
Yeah, well, I guess I'll say one of the great things about being a sociologist is that you have a job where you get to reckon with the reality of our complex world and our complex lives. And we live in a kind of ideological time, and a lot of people, they know what they believe and they find stories that fit their beliefs already. We have a whole cable news infrastructure that's set up to confirm your priors. And what I love about my job, what's so great about being a scholar and a social scientist, is you get to discover new things, and you get to deal with the messiness of reality. And so I knew that the experience of 2020 varied tremendously, depending on who you were, depending on where you lived, depending on what situation for you, for your family, for your community was. And I wanted to capture that. My original idea is that since the world was reckoning with a lot of difficult problems in 2020, I would write a book about the global situation, but you probably remember it was not the best time for international flights, long-term
Sure,
trips.
why not?
So I could not travel anywhere, but I did realize that as a New Yorker, I happened to be living in the place that was about as global and international as you could find. And so I decided that I would find a set of people whose range of experiences would help me reflect on the bigger set of stories. The strategy was I found a person from each borough of New York, and I looked for a person whose story I thought in some way spoke to the fundamental trends of the place where they lived, and we could get into that. But what happened in the Bronx was different from what happened in Manhattan, which was different from Staten Island, and so I had 3 very different characters there. And then I thought, well, what have I missed? And I realized I had missed the story of someone who got very involved in racial politics that year, the Black Lives Matter movement in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. And I tracked the story of an activist. And then I also realized that by following people through the year 2020, I had missed the story of someone who died early in 2020 of COVID when it first hit. And that story was also really important to tell. This is an incredibly deadly year in the United States. So the 7th character is a worker in the subway system, a custodian who died in the first weeks of the pandemic. And I think through their 7 stories, we really get an appreciation of how complicated this year was, and how difficult it is to neatly package it into one simple line.
Mm-hmm. You talk, go a little further with these, and we'll get to a few of the stories. Yeah. One of the things you said in a previous discussion we had was the whole idea of essential workers, and how that is one of the striking points about that time. Can you talk about that?
I can't stop thinking about the essential worker story, because go back to this idea. Does that crises reveal something fundamental about us, right? Who we are, what we value. So you'll recall that in the early months of the pandemic, we were so scared about this new virus and the risks that it posed for us that the government said, listen, don't go to work, close down the bars and restaurants, close down the gyms, actually close down the schools. The only people who should be out there going about their business are people we're going to call essential workers, right? And those people, we said, are so important that government, society, the economy cannot function without them. And so one would think immediately, like, oh, when you call someone essential, you are bestowing upon them this honorific, and you're recognizing, you're publicly acknowledging some people and some jobs are just more important. And by virtue of that, it seems that a good society would then say, because you're doing this work and we depend on you, we're going to give you PPE, right? You're going to get masks and gloves and all the things that you can do to stay safe. We're going to give you the best healthcare money can buy. We're going to get you first in line for vaccines when they become available. We're going to compensate you with bonuses. We're going to remember you and thank you. And we did almost none of that in the US, unfortunately. We did put a number of essential workers at the front of the line for vaccines, but for the most part, we just took them for granted. And I believe that what happened in the US is that to be called essential was in fact to be deemed expendable.
Yeah.
And so essential workers...
It's like a euphemism for you're not so important.
Absolutely. And it's striking, right? Like if you ask someone what the labor market calls essential, the labor market says, it's the bankers, it's the finance guys, it's the lawyers, it's the NBA players, But when push comes to shove, when you are at the moment of truth, we all know that that's not what really matters. That we depend on a very different set of people, right? The janitors, the cleaners, the retail workers, the people who do food preparation, yes, healthcare workers, delivery people, retail workers, and they're the low-income workers of our society. And they're often immigrant laborers, and we don't treat them like they're essential at all. But in this moment, we said that they were. But actually what we did is we just made them go out and perform labor that was risky at a time when we didn't have resources to protect them or didn't invest resources in protecting them. So they became much more likely to get COVID. Then they were much more likely to bring COVID home to their families if they lived in crowded apartments, as many low-income workers did. Many people wound up getting COVID in their neighborhoods, and the death rates show that. And what's striking to me in 2024 is that we've never acknowledged our debt to all the people we called essential workers. We've never gone back and asked ourselves, what does it mean that we created this new category and we asked people to do this thing for us? And it seems to me like it's not too late to have that conversation. Like maybe we need to have that conversation, and maybe in doing it, we'll start to touch on some of the political and policy issues that remain important to Americans now. We're talking a few weeks before the 2024 election. We know that the plight of low-income workers or Americans who feel like they are unappreciated, whose role in the society has been unacknowledged, that's a big part of the problem that's driving a lot of people to the polls this year. And I wonder how things could have gone differently if we had attended to this situation and not just kind of swept it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen.
So I want to tell a little anecdote and then read a quote from you and ask you to speak on it. My wife and I lived in Washington, D.C. when in the early 80s they finally had a march to honor the Vietnam veterans. And it was, I don't remember, whatever year it was, they put up the new memorial. Yeah. And the Vietnam veterans had been treated like garbage, right, when they came back and spat it and all the things we all know. And that was kind of the first national acknowledgement. And it was a really incredibly emotional time to say, to some degree, we were wrong, those of us who didn't treat you well, and we're going to do something now. And it's changed the way we treat veterans who serve in wars today, right? Say this is something different. The quote I want to read is, this is from your piece in the Times about the book. The very different people I spoke with that year all had one thing in common, a feeling that in the wake of COVID, all the larger institutions that they had been taught to trust had failed them. And at the most precarious times in their lives, they found there was no system in place to help. Certainly speaks to essential workers, but this is a bigger point you're making.
Very much so. I think the one unifying thread in these 7 very different stories is the feeling that in some weird way I'm on my own. The system, the society, the government, the big businesses didn't really have our backs in the way that we wanted them to. And that might come across as a bit of an overstatement given the stimulus checks and the Child Poverty Reduction Act. I mean, the government did a lot of things and spent a lot of money. But it was a little bit scattershot and haphazard and late in some ways. There were months before Americans knew how they were going to be helped. The Child Poverty Reduction Act, which was a kind of miraculous piece of legislation that cut child poverty in half,
like nothing, right?
It didn't actually get implemented until 2021, and it ended the next year when Congress refused to renew it. So it wound up being short-lived. And compared to people in other countries who felt a kind of confidence in the healthcare system to do its best, or government to make sure that they maintain their jobs, or a minimum income, or maintain the public health, I think Americans looked at our society and looked at government and saw chaos.
And so I think that was great. We're getting close to needing to finish this, which seems crazy. Yeah. We just started. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of places where people come together as part of the solution? This is Palaces for the People. Yeah. This is the Third Place work that Gary Oldenhauer, isn't it? Oldenberg wrote the book about that. Talk a little bit about that as part of the way we come back together to work collectively and understand nuance.
Yeah. So you're referencing this book I wrote before this called Palaces for the People, which is about social infrastructure, the physical places that shape our capacity to interact. And I'm a big advocate for investing in social infrastructure as a way for addressing some of the divisions that we've been discussing today. Ray Oldenburg, wrote about third places like bars and coffee shops, and those things are important. I think social infrastructure as being these more publicly accessible places, libraries, parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, community centers. I mean, a public school can be more or less accessible and can help to bridge a community. We're speaking at the University of Delaware right now, which is a public institution. It's my view that these divisions that have emerged in America are serious. I think we often exaggerate them, but they are still obviously significant. We are heading into a really divisive and explosive election. A lot of people are worried about what happens next, and I have no idea where we'll be. I don't think that, I'm not so naive as to think that if we invest more in gathering places and bringing people together with bridging institutions and programmings, that just doing that is going to solve our problem. That would be way too easy. Things are just far beyond that. But I know that we're not going to solve our problem of polarization on Twitter. I'm quite sure of that. I know it's not going to happen on cable news. And the argument I've made in a lot of my writing is that if what we're trying to do is rebuild a civil society and restore some culture that fosters democracy across differences, we need a formula for doing it. And my view is the investment in social infrastructure is about the best way we could begin that process. We just need to find a way to, non-violently engage each other and reckon with some of the fundamental differences we have. It's my experience that we're better at doing this in person than we are on our screens. And when we're with other people who think about the world differently than us, if we start with the politics, it's going to be a disaster.
Yep.
But if we get to know each other in the context of other activities, we build confidence in each other and can start to recognize our shared humanity. And it's from that foundation that we can start to grow.
I couldn't agree more, which is why I asked the question, because I wanted you to talk about these things. I think a lot about what I call the through line of community, which is what are the projects we want to work on together? Is it a new ball field, more street lights, safety, a good library? We start there. And then in the midst of that, building a playground for somebody, in the midst of that, we start to get to know each other. Yeah. And that's where the magic happens. And that's the thing we've lost too much. That's where nuance lies. And that's where answers lie, I think, and a stronger community.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah. Eric, thank you so much. This is fabulous. You've got so much valuable to say. And I hope people do pick up this book, 2020. Sometimes we get these books and I say, it's a little thick. And I like this kind of thing. But this is a great book in so many ways that it's a book you can find stories. You go in and find the story or find a chapter about why masks and the complication of masks and start with that. And before long, you're going to read the whole thing because there's so much to say, not just about COVID, but about how we live together and how we build strong community. How to Not Kill Your Community is a podcast written and produced by the Delaware Community Foundation. Thank you to our producers at 1440 Film Company in Wilmington. The Delaware Community Foundation, DCF, stands at the intersection of generosity and community transformation. As experts in community need, we guide individuals and organizations to opportunities that impact causes they care about the most. We manage charitable funds, distribute scholarships, advise donors, and grant to nonprofits, providing leadership to cultivate the future of philanthropy in Delaware. Visit us at delcf.org for more information.